Hi, Jennifer, Roy Francoli. Welcome. You've got a fascinating story to tell. You've had a fascinating journey, and what you offer now really, really interests me. Tell me about where you began.
Oh my goodness. So thank you so much, first of all, Robin, for having me on. This is going to be really fun. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania,
Yep.
and I'm actually Swiss American. My mom is Swiss. My dad is American, from a musical family, musical
Yeah.
background. And I wanted to play the violin when I was 2 and
Yep.
got it when I was 4 and haven't looked back really. So, as a kid, teenager, I was quite successful as a violinist, very, very focused.
Hmm.
Won international competitions, played with symphony orchestras, played at Carnegie
Whoa.
Hall, all that. And then I completely shifted gears when I turned 19.
Yep.
And yeah, it's a long story, but I shifted gears and got married at 20 without having expected to do that at all. But
Yeah.
that kind of changed my life direction, as you can imagine.
Well, you don't kind of plan those kind of things. Love comes along when it comes along.
That's right. It was obvious to me and no regrets.
Good. That's great news. So
Yeah.
tell me about this shift. So you were an extremely successful violinist, and of course, you could theoretically you could have stayed so, yeah, and you could have taught at amazing institutions as a lead violinist. But your journey in life had a different direction. You were definitely destined somewhere else.
Yes. Well, life does kind of do unusual, unexpected things. And I was actually much more interested in the heart of the music, the essence of the music. Even from the
Yeah.
time I was really little, I I was very shy, and I found that music was my way to easily, completely express myself and communicate with others without words.
So tell me
And
what do you mean by the heart and the essence of the music then?
well, I think of music as well, when I make music, I connect to the heart of who I am, the essence of who I am, and I do my best to get my ego out of the way and allow the inspiration to come to me, through me, and out my body, through my mind, through my body, out my violin. And actually, this is what I teach as, a coach for musicians. I help people to learn exactly how to get out of the way to enable inspiration to flow.
So where did your journey begin from perhaps reading notes or knowing the rhythms and knowing where your fingers had to go to what you're describing is kind of the idea of the music's in your mind and then it flows through your body.
Yeah.
How do we achieve this? Where did your journey start in this search?
Well, I think I was very fortunate to have a natural predisposition to be able to do that.
Okay.
But I think a lot of artists, improve because there is a challenge that they need to overcome. And for
Okay.
me, being very shy was a challenge,
Mhm.
but also you know, being a kid is hard. Being a teenager is hard.
Mhm. Yep.
And music was my emotional outlet. And I
Okay.
remember very well, in the evenings, maybe I had a hard day, I would go to my room, I'd close the door, turn off the lights, and just pour my heart and soul out through that instrument. And it was more important to me to be able to be expressive for my own self healing, my own well being. That was more important to me in those moments than the technique or getting all the notes right. Or, I
Mhm.
didn't really, yeah, I did all the technical study that one needs to do. As I was very disciplined and I had excellent
Okay.
teachers. But I think yeah, and I had excellent teachers who encouraged the musicality and expressiveness that I was exploring.
That's great. Now I know you moved on to something known as the Alexander technique.
Yes.
So tell us about the Alexander technique and perhaps the benefits of that, or why you think that would be important or useful to people, or maybe people might want to find out about it or pursue it, or maybe you'd like to recommend it.
Yes. Well, before I tell you how I think of the Alexander technique, I'll just
Hmm.
follow. what happened is that when I became a teenager and I finally, got married and shifted gears away from my using my violin in the way I just described, I kept playing, but I kind of didn't care so much about it anymore. And
Okay.
I didn't realize that over the years, I started to become less and less happy, in large part because I was suppressing my creative nature. And I was no longer using my music and my creativity to take care of myself the way I was
Do you
naturally
think
as
this
a
was
kid.
just part of the stage of life you were at, and just being an adult, and everything you were going through was tiring, and all the adult responsibilities, and
There were a lot of reasons why I gradually became less happy. And also, I
mm,
started to have more physical aches and pains. I
okay.
had two kids, wonderful kids. I love being a mother. But yeah, it was stressful. I was also very isolated because of my
Mm,
life situation where we were living. And
mhm.
yeah, and so just progressively, I started becoming less and less happy, and I had more pain in my body. And I tried all kinds of things to help me with my neck pain. I went to the
Okay.
doctor, went to chiropractor,
Yep.
just tried everything, but I had this terrible neck pain where I couldn't turn my neck in one direction.
Okay.
So a good friend of mine recommended the Alexander technique, and I tried it, and it was really quite miraculous for me. Um, Within a few lessons with my teacher, my neck pain was completely gone. But not only that, I suddenly had this experience of really being fully, completely in my body and comfortable in my body, and also being able to move my body with a kind of freedom and lightness that I had never, ever experienced before.
It sounds incredible. So, what is the Alexander technique then?
Yes, the $1 million question now.
Yeah. What is it?
So the Alexander technique is, the way I think of it, is a mind-body discipline
Hmm.
that helps you observe yourself with more objectivity than we're used to.
Yeah.
And it allows us to notice how our thoughts are intimately connected with our body. So
Okay.
really, truly, what you think is what you get in your body. Your body is just obedient to your mind. So
Okay.
if you have aches and pain, a lot of my students come to me because they have physical pain
Hmm.
playing their musical instruments
Hmm.
or conducting or singing, whatever.
Yes.
So they have pains and difficulties in their bodies, but they aren't really aware of how much their thinking is contributing to that pain in the body. So
Okay.
the Alexander technique helps you become more aware of your habitual ways of thinking and moving, that so that you can make choices to think in a way that is enhancing your well-being rather than taking you in a direction of more pain and dis-ease and discomfort, and unhappiness goes along with that. I became incredibly happy very quickly after I started the Alexander
That's
technique.
great.
I didn't
That's
know what
great.
hit me. Suddenly I was in love with life and everything was rosy and happy. It was great.
So I
And
know you did a lot of research, and I know you've had lots of awards, and you've been involved in all sorts. But you've taken the Alexander technique, and in your spirit for the art of freedom,
yes.
you've gone another level.
Well, yes, in a sense I have, because not everybody who teaches or studies the Alexander technique is necessarily interested in applying it to all of life. And I
Mhm.
just personally, I see how everything is interconnected,
Yes.
everything in the self, but also everything around us. And ultimately, there's, really just one presence. That's my perspective. And so I have taken the Alexander technique and added on to it my life experience, and especially my experience as a musician. So I do specialize in helping musicians with the Alexander technique, but I bring in what I call my 5 pillars of the Art of Freedom method, which
Okay.
are purpose,
Yes.
mind, body, spirit, and artistry.
Okay.
So when I'm coaching one of my coaching clients, or working with, one of my group members, we're always putting everything into the context of the whole of the person, and keeping in mind that purpose is essential. You have to know what you want and why you want it. And that goes back to, the heart of music. Why are we making music to begin with? I think ultimately it's because it helps us to feel better, and it makes us, really connect to what's most important in life. It's a creative spirit and communication with others through beauty.
Yes.
So the Art of Freedom just puts everything all together, and I have a system that helps people with using the Alexander Technique principles, but also I teach a special brand of the Alexander Technique, which is called Primal Alexander. Okay. It's a hands-free way of teaching the Alexander Technique without the hands that was developed by Mio Morales. And that's why, even though I was trained traditionally and I taught using my hands with touch, for years, I prefer now to teach without my hands so that my students can know exactly what they are doing to improve on their own.
Okay, so the Alexander Technique, a lot of it is about the mind relating to physical tension, and it's also about posture and finding the least stressful ways of being in order to free yourself more. Now, I'm very interested in the fact that, and I know we have similarities here, in that you believe that a lot of what we can do in musicians is in our mind first, and that you can actually practice in the mind and train in the mind, and then tell the muscles what to do. Tell me about training the mind, practicing in the mind, becoming a better musician in your head that leads to something physical afterwards.
Yes, well, actually, the physical manifestation of ideas is really just the last step. And usually we have it backwards when we are learning instruments, and as educators also, very often we're focused on the body and like what the hands are doing, what the fingers are doing, or what the vocal folds are doing, what the diaphragm is doing, if you're a singer. Yes. And that emphasis on specific body parts is actually, it's an effect. What happens in the body is an effect of what we're thinking in the mind. So if we want to make real fundamental improvements in ourselves and our music making, we must start with how we're thinking about things. And you need to have a very clear ideal of what you're wishing to create. And then I like to tell my students that we are using the mind, the prefrontal cortex, this thinking part of our brain of here, using this part of the mind to actually get the mind out of the way. Like there's so much chatter and clutter in our minds, negative thinking, critical, judgmental thinking, worry about the future, regret over the past. That's the stuff that gets in the way. We are designed to naturally express ourselves freely in mind, body, and spirit.
But how do you practice in your mind?
Well, there's a lot to that question. But if I were to make it super simple, I mean, obviously, this is something I teach in great detail.
Yes. And you can't answer in 2 sentences. This is a 6-month course.
That's right. They're very specific steps to be able to do this really well. But it's actually natural to us. So very, very simply, one can just sit and you can ask yourself, well, right now, what do I notice about myself? What do I notice about my body? What do I notice about my thoughts? And so you bring yourself back to the present moment. You start there. Okay. Once you're embodied and you're in yourself and you're quieting the chatter in your mind, then you can start to hear what you wish to create. And everything's an experiment. So you start with hearing, sort of hearing in your mind or visualizing. Some people like to see the notes. But it's just, when you're talking about creating music, there are so many details, but you just start. You start from a blank slate, and then you wait for the ideas to come to you. And they do. And then you practice that.
Right. So that presumably leads to a more expressive performance.
It can, if that's what we want.
Okay. If that's the objective, which was for the
Yes.
first pillar.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think the music actually, the expressiveness of music is built in.
Yep.
So we don't have to do the expression in the music. In fact, when we think about trying to be expressive, or trying to shape it this way or trying to do it that way, we're actually getting in the way of the music doing itself.
So that's more academic rather than feeling, if you see what I mean.
Yes, and when you do that, you're actually increasing the tension in your musculature, which really, it might feel like you're more expressive, but the truth is you're just feeling tension in the muscles, and that doesn't get expressed. That doesn't get across to the audience.
So is your view that our learned habits from our, say, anxieties, or that voice in the back of your head that says if you make a mistake, everybody's going to laugh at you kind of thing, do you think then that we are, in effect, it's not about training us to be more expressive, it's that we are actually blocking our expression?
Exactly. Yes. I think we're made to be expressive naturally.
Right.
And we're made to have an idea and let it move us physically and emotionally and spiritually, if you think that way. But
almost in the sense that we've all watched a movie and we've had a little tear in our eye because we've been that moved. Because at that moment, we let it go.
That's right. And you're allowing yourself to be moved.
Yeah.
And very often we don't allow ourselves to be deeply moved out of fear. Yeah. Because being moved with your whole self takes over.
Yes.
And it's a huge event that many people are not used to. We're not used to allowing ourselves to feel intensely. And also we're not used to allowing those feelings to flow through us. We're used to holding on to them or like you said perfectly, blocking them.
Yes.
But actually feelings, they flow through us in and out. It's very quickly if we allow that.
So you were also talking almost in a Buddhist spiritual sense of finding yourself and being true to yourself. And do you think that is the part of what you're teaching that helps with performance anxiety? The idea that maybe you've practiced things really well and then you come to an event and everything just falls apart because you just get so worried, you get so tense, and you're more aware of what other people are thinking than you are about the music you're trying to channel to them.
That's right. That's right. I mean, ultimately, for myself, there's thunder. I don't know if you can hear it. It's like a big storm just started. Lightning and thunder. So ideally, I think for myself and for my students, what I would like is to be able to just be myself freely in every sense of that word, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. I like to be free to be myself, regardless of the circumstances.
Yes.
And that's something that really requires a clear intention, a clear practice, lots of practice, and the freedom also to mess up and learn from your mistakes.
So, and when you're saying practice, you're not necessarily mean practicing a piece, you mean practicing being free, practicing your mindset.
That's right.
Practicing channeling, or not channeling even.
Yeah, well, what I like to think of the self as our primary instrument.
Okay,
and
that's great.
This is what we need to practice. And
then we can channel it through different instruments or through our voice or however we want to, whichever.
Or walking the dog or doing the dishes.
Whatever.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm also interested in this in relation to improvisation, because obviously if we felt something and we just wanted to play it, that is awesome in terms of improvisation. That's just instant creativity.
Yes.
But there's also that thing in your mind of, hang on, I'm hearing something, there's something in my brain, what note is it? What chord is it? What sounds right? And then you hit it and then it sounds wrong. And you go, how do we...
And then what do you do? Do you react?
What do we do? Yeah. or do you just accept it? How do you get to that level of freedom? I mean, thinking of pianists like Oscar Peterson, who just seem to just sit and do everything at lightning speed and it sounds amazing and it doesn't matter who he's with. How do we get to that stage of it just flows?
Well,
Or what we hear in our head and we connect it with our fingers and we actually know what note it is if we haven't got perfect pitch.
Right. Well, there's a lot in what you just said. Which way should I go? Well, the thing that's coming to my mind is one of my favorite quotes from F.M. Alexander. And he said, quote, "Mine is a method for the control of human reaction." And end quote. And what you're talking about, like with performance anxiety, for example, is that there's a stimulus, something happens. Suddenly you see the critic in the front row, you know, and then you instinctively very often react before you've even had a chance to think about it, because first of all, it's not natural to be performing. There's an animal part of our brain that is not made to be on the spotlight being watched alone.
It's the fight or flight.
Exactly. So that's what happens. So we go into a fight or flight startle pattern, and that includes thoughts. It includes the body freezing up. We're tensing up. There's a lot of contracting going on, and it actually impedes our thinking process.
Yeah.
So when I'm helping somebody with performance anxiety, I'm helping them to develop the capacity, the sensitivity to recognize immediately, right away when that happens, because if you catch it right away, and this can even be 3 weeks before the performance, when you wake up on one morning and you think, oh my God, I have a performance in 3 weeks, you're already in a startle pattern.
Yes.
That's when the musician needs to start practicing to recognize what's happening and then have something else to do instead, which is, well, in the Alexander world, we call it constructive thinking. And that's a very specific way that I teach to think that helps you. I
like the way you said there. That's when the musician needs to start practicing as opposed to the person. And there's a difference there. So now, obviously, not only do you coach other people, but this has made a difference to your own playing as you've come through your journey of pain and anxiety, and you've turned your own life round and you've found yourself. So tell me today, now, or the last few months, what's your recent playing? How has this channeled through you? What are you doing with this?
Well, I guess we are just coming out of the pandemic right now, and hopefully it won't last much longer. But I just turned 50 this year, and I had always had this dream to make professional solo recordings. And I thought, well, I'm 50, it's now or never. So I actually set up a home recording studio. You can see the acoustic tiles back there.
Yep.
And I knew nothing about how to do this myself. I'd been on recordings with groups before, but never done it myself. So taught myself the whole process, had people helping me, and had a producer in Cleveland, had an engineer in Virginia, and we managed to do it all remotely. And so I've actually created my first professional solo violin recordings. And that's been my big pandemic project. I just released the Bach Chaconne from the D minor partita a couple of months ago. And June 11th, the Izai Ballade is going to be released on all digital platforms.
Great.
And then I have something else in the works, and my album should come out hopefully for Christmas.
Fabulous. So what are you, as comparing yourself to the extremely successful teenager when you were already brilliant at violin, already extremely successful, to the you now having gone through the journey you've gone, and now you're recording, the person who's recorded now compared to the person recorded then? What are you most proud of? What's so different?
Well, I am very different from how I was as a kid. As I said before, I was naturally gifted, and I had natural sensitivities, but there are pictures of me when I was a kid, and I have so much tension in my body. And I was not comfortable in myself. I was very shy and kind of closed down in a sense. And it's pretty amazing that I was as successful as I was, considering that I had, a lot of challenges mentally, emotionally, physically. And
Yes.
I did not have a spiritual center at the time. I wasn't
Okay.
brought up that way. Music was my religion, really,
Yes.
literally.
Yes. Yes.
And so then I kind of left all that for a few decades, finally found the Alexander technique. And it's been a long process coming back to music, how I loved it as a child. And yet I wish I had known what I know now about how the mind and body work together. I wish I had had the Alexander technique when I was young, because I could have avoided a lot of suffering in every sense.
I'm thinking that
but now, I have it now, and I understand how I have gotten to where I am, and I can now teach it, having, understanding what the obstacles are.
As a performer, though, I mean, somebody who's performed at the Carnegie Hall, you'd think that would be your ultimate dream, and yet you're recording now. Would you say that your performance is different to then, as well as the physical side, your musical, your expression? What are you most proud of from an extra musical perspective, if you see what I mean?
Yes. Well, I think my ability to consciously get out of the way and let the music speak for itself is the most wonderful thing. And I can't do it all the time, but I know how to do it. Yes. And it is consistent when I really pay attention the way I know that works, and follow the steps that I know work. I can consistently access flow and allow inspiration to flow through very easily now. And I think the biggest difference perhaps in my performing is my sense of time.
Okay, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. And that's hard to describe, but
is that like when you see some of these TV programs like the A&E, the accidents and emergency ones, where you have the doctor who's kind of overseeing everything, and he's totally calm and not panicked, and there's this person in distress who's just been brought in by an ambulance. Everybody else is running around doing what they're doing, and they're just calm, centered, focused, assessing the situation, and they're almost outside looking in. Is that what we're looking at?
In a sense, yes. There's very much, well, it's that, and okay, I think what you're talking about is the observer, being a witness to oneself, being an observer. And yes, there is a healthy kind of detachment from what I'm doing. And yet I'm completely present and in control of what I'm doing. And control is a tricky word, because you're actually totally in control when you let go of control.
Yeah. No, I think what you mean by totally in control is you mean totally channeling or totally flowing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
rather than
dictating.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, yes. I did have an experience once, and I'll say this really quickly, but it's a great story because I was performing. I was maybe in my early 20s. I was performing as a soloist with a very technically challenging piece, the chanson poème. I was a soloist with an orchestra, and I came to after one page of having played it. I was completely not present. I don't know where it was. My mind was out to lunch. And suddenly I came back to my body, and I found myself performing this challenging piece in front of hundreds of people. And it freaked me out so much that I probably would have quit and never played as a soloist again, because I was so afraid that I didn't mess up, which is a miracle. Nobody knew, but I had a second repeat performance. I mean, I had a repeat performance the next night, thankfully, so that I had to do it again. And I was there for every moment after that. That was long before I learned the Alexander technique. Now that would never happen, because I know how to be completely present, and that's desirable. I would never want to. So I was completely dissociated when I played that chanson poème. And it was wonderful. People loved it, but I wasn't there, and I did not like that experience. So that's a different kind of not being, not being there. I want to be able to feel the music also. And
that's what I'm going to take away from this, Jennifer, is not blocking the flow, not getting in the way of the flow. The flow will be there naturally, and the only person blocking it flowing is me.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And there are ways to learn how to get out of the way of that flow and go with it and just be part of the music, because it has a life of its own in a sense. I mean, it's you, but it does itself through us.
Yes. I'm absolutely loving this, and you're leaving me wanting more, which is fabulous. That's the way it should be.
Well,
that's
you ask great questions. I love
Thank you, Jennifer.
It's my favorite thing to talk about.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Robin.
Good luck with all your new projects. It's fabulous to hear that not only are you helping other people, but you're being able to channel this and your own emotions flowing through your own playing in a way that are less blocked than they've ever been.
Yes,
Jennifer,
I'm so grateful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wishing you all the best. Bye now.
Bye. Bye.